The forward base didn't have a name anyone used. It was more gravel than structure, the kind of place where the heat clung to metal before the sun even reached its peak. Mid-morning haze drifted across the low buildings, blurring the edges of tents, antenna arrays, and the angled silhouettes of aircraft in idle posture. The wind, when it came, was dry and toothless, carrying more dust than relief. Dana walked across the hardened earth with her flight gloves looped through her belt. Boots quiet against the packed ground. No one called to her. No one nodded. They didn't need to. She wasn't someone they expected to speak. Her C-146A Wolfhound sat alone at the far end of the lot, its matte gray body streaked in pale dust, paint worn near the nose and stabilizers. The other aircraft sleek, louder, newer lined the center grid. Their crews stood in tight clusters, radios clipped, checklists flashing on backlit tablets. Dana passed them unnoticed. One junior crewman looked up from his roster, eyes skimming the page. He blinked once and mumbled toward his team. Slot Delta. Support only. B-Team Bird. They didn't look her way. She didn't look at them. She said nothing. She didn't even pause. At the Wolfhound's side hatch, she keyed in her code, stepped up into the shadowed interior, and began her checks. The air inside still held the memory of oil and old heat. Her clipboard was balanced against the bulkhead. Notes already marked from her pre-dawn review. She ran through the panel lights, then adjusted the compass. The drift read 2 degrees off true. She corrected it by feel, her fingers steady as she recalibrated heading and roll. It wasn't wrong enough to register for most, but she trusted her own thresholds. She always had. Across the tarmac, the recon team approached in no particular hurry. 6 men in half-buttoned uniforms, one intel officer tapping at a handheld screen, another carrying 2 cases like he was late for something more important. No one looked at Dana. No one asked about fuel, elevation, or updated terrain. One of them climbed the rear ramp with a grunt and said toward the cabin, "We get the prop bus again. B-Team Bird and a coffee pilot." Dana glanced once in the mirror above the nav station. Her own face met her, calm and unreadable. She didn't speak. She returned to reviewing the outbound weather brief. The route given to her stayed west of the ridgeline, avoiding the main corridor. She knew why. The higher priority flights were stacked along the inner basin. What she'd been given was clean airspace no one else wanted. That was fine. The terrain markers hadn't been updated in 8 days. She'd studied the slope patterns before sunrise, matching them to the last clean satellite pass she had printed and tucked under her seat. The image showed ridgelines the new charts didn't. She trusted it more than the database. A young controller's voice crackled over the local channel. "Slot Delta. Maintain visual outside grid line. Do not enter priority airways." He sounded like he was reading it from a handbook. Dana acknowledged without inflection. Her eyes stayed on the chart. She closed the notebook, slid it beside her seat, and pulled the hatch shut. The Wolfhound systems hummed to life in a sequence she knew by heart. Battery, avionics, pressure, throttle, outside. The recon team was still settling into seats. One dropped a bag against the bulkhead. Another yawned audibly. No one asked for a safety brief. No one called her name. The aircraft taxied without flare. No escort. No acknowledgement from the central pad. The tower's clearance was delivered without tone. Dana responded with her call sign, steady and clipped. As the Wolfhound turned toward the horizon, she adjusted pitch, marked wind vector, and lifted clean into the sky. Smooth, deliberate, quiet. The wheels retracted with a soft shudder. She looked once at the terrain grid, then back at her own chart. No one saw her do it, but she had already plotted where they would land if things went wrong. 2 years earlier, Dana had written a report no one asked for. It was detailed, precise, and quiet. just like her. The topic was GPS drift in high-density mountainous terrain during low-band interference windows. The phrasing was careful. The evidence drawn from 5 separate flight logs and 2 barometric surveys. The conclusion was simple. Maps were wrong more often than command realized. The terrain behaved differently after cloud breaks, and the margin of error could push a safe descent into a disaster. The note she received in response called it geographic noise, an expected deviation, not worth rerouting assets. That month, another pilot was assigned to the route she flagged. He flew it clean. No incident. Dana flew the return leg 3 days later and came in during an inversion pocket. The cloud floor tilted wrong and the wind shear misaligned. Her instruments told her she was clear. Her eyes told her she wasn't. She used the slope shadows and the echo of her own prop wash against the cliffs to time the turn. She landed late and alone. The after-action notes didn't mention her deviation. Her name was not on the brief. No one asked how she found the shelf she touched down on. No one mentioned the 3-degree difference that saved her airframe. She kept the satellite image from that day. Not the official one. The public overlay had already smoothed the ridge by the time she filed her log. She kept the older version, printed at her own expense the night before the mission. It showed the jagged teeth of the canyon before anyone edited it into a clean arc. That image, folded in quarters and marked in ink, stayed with her long after the file was closed. Not because it proved anything, but because it reminded her she had been right. After that, she stopped filing corrections. The base rotated her to logistics transport and auxiliary roles, assigning her aircraft that didn't have names, only numbers and rust. She didn't complain. She requested nothing. She completed recertification on the C-146A quietly, without asking for flight command. She knew its ceiling range, its temperature thresholds, and how the left yaw trim drifted after 8 hours in sustained crosswind. She didn't mention that either. In her bunk, she kept a sealed envelope tucked inside her boot. It held the rejection form from her last formal safety proposal. The stamp was half smudged. The review date was blank. It didn't make her angry anymore. It made her careful. Her tools were analog. She used pencil, not stylus. She charted slope gradients using shadow length from dawnlight overlays. She cross-checked wind models by hand using a barometer small enough to fit in her jacket pocket. The casing was scratched and dulled from years of being handled, its faceplate slightly loose. It had belonged to her uncle, a smoke jumper who taught her to read weather the way others read traffic signs. If the pressure dropped before the horizon did, you were already late. Her logbook was stitched canvas, weather-sealed but faded. It contained terrain sketches from jungle drops, snowfield ridgelines, and desert flats that hadn't been surveyed in a decade. On the inside cover, she had written her only personal rule: satellites lie. Dirt doesn't. The current mission had arrived late the night before, a last-minute reassignment after a routing conflict. Her name appeared at the bottom of the manifest, listed beneath fuel capacity and support frequency. No one told her who assigned it. No one came by to brief her. That was fine. She already had the materials. The chart she used was not the one command provided. It was a cleaned satellite pass from 3 weeks ago, the last one that showed full tree line density and ridge folds in raw detail. Since then, cloud cover had distorted everything. The new overlays were flattened, low res, and full of guesses. She knew it because she had downloaded both and compared them side by side. The older one had more truth in it, even if it was obsolete by file date. She spent 2 hours before sunrise memorizing the slope curves and the alignment of rock shadows along the southeastern ridgeline. She could see it now without looking. When the others were at the mess tent, Dana was outside under the wing of the wolfhound, adjusting the tension on the gear latch. She ran through the feel of the controls in silence, hands moving the same way they did on every pre-flight, slow and methodical. When the wind shifted against her neck, she looked up and read the angle of it against the distant flag. It wasn't habit. It was her calibration. That morning, She had skipped the standard route packet and used her own set. It included hand-inked notes on microclimate shears, satellite shadow gaps, and terrain inconsistencies. She didn't explain this to anyone. They wouldn't have read it anyway. Dana wasn't waiting to be seen. She was waiting for the ground to match her memory. She knew that when the systems failed, when the wind turned wrong or the signal cut, what mattered most wouldn't be the flight plan. It would be whether she remembered what the rock face looked like when the sun caught it 30 degrees off center, and whether her margin of error was smaller than the team's margin of panic. She didn't fly with adrenaline. She flew with pattern, and the pattern told her the charts were wrong again. No one had asked her how she prepared. No one knew she had already circled the 3 possible safe landings if the route shifted 10 degrees east. No one knew she had packed an extra set of ground markers in case she had to hold a site alone. That wasn't listed on the manifest. That wasn't in the training logs. That was just Dana. They didn't know. They didn't want to know. And she had stopped trying to tell them. What they called backup, she called alignment. What they saw as over-preparing, she saw as not forgetting. Dana didn't fly for rank. She flew for truth. And she knew how terrain held it better than screens ever could. The first static popped just past the ridge break. Dana heard it before the recon team noticed. She adjusted her left wrist against the throttle and reached across the panel, tapping once to refresh the signal lock. It held for 4 seconds, then dropped. The GPS froze on a coordinate that hadn't matched her own plotted path for at least 10 minutes. Outside, the light had already shifted. The sky ahead flattened into a washed slate gray, and the outline of the terrain softened at the edges. A storm wall was rising where the forecast had promised open air. The models had been wrong. Again, in the back, someone cursed. Another voice came over the cabin headset. "Are we rerouting? That shelf looks tight. This doesn't match the grid." Dana didn't respond. She was already descending by degrees, not enough to trigger alarm, but enough to start lining up alternate vectors. Her fingers moved across the bearing control, turning 1 notch at a time, eyes on the slope beyond the first break. The ridgeline ahead wasn't one she'd been assigned to fly over, but it was one she remembered from the clean sat pass she had studied before sunrise. The turbulence started low, a vibration in the soles of her boots. One of the recon team yelled over the intercom, "You seeing this pressure drop? That's a pocket spin. We need to bank left." Another chimed in, "Terrain is compressing to the east. Shift course." Dana made no move. Her hand stayed steady on the yoke. She adjusted her pitch trim by instinct. Her jaw flexed once. She didn't explain. Outside the port window, the tree line twisted under a sudden gust. The wolfhound rocked, pulled briefly sideways, then corrected. Dana eased the throttle. The radar swept forward and returned no usable elevation. Too much static, too many false shadows. She ignored it. The team leader's voice cracked through again, sharper this time. "This is off route. We're too low. Left bank. Now." "That's an order." Dana banked right, not sharply, just enough to follow the darker notch between 2 visible slopes. Her eyes flicked down once to the hand-drawn notes beside her throttle. Her pen strokes were still clear, even under low light. The right pass was shallower. The wind would sweep down, not across. She made the turn. In the rear, one of the recon men was strapping down loose gear. Another stood behind his seat, gripping the headrest. "She's not even saying anything. We're dropping blind." The intel officer looked pale, eyes locked on a tablet that had long since frozen. Dana tapped her altimeter. The reading flickered, then held. She marked the bearing again. No one else could see what she was following, but she had already drawn it out before the wheels ever left the ground. The descent was smooth, counterintuitive. To anyone watching, it felt wrong, too slow, too quiet. But Dana was reading the shadows, the way they stretched sideways across the low clearing ahead. The trees bent slightly, not against her, but with the wind moving through them. She nudged the nose forward again. One final pocket of crosswind hit them before the drop. The wolfhound shuddered once. Dana's left boot braced against the panel support, right hand feathering the throttle. She adjusted the yaw 3 clicks right, then dropped into the flat. The landing wasn't hard. It wasn't textbook either. It was precise. The rear tires kissed rock and scrub, the suspension catching more slope than it was rated for. But the airframe held. Dana adjusted pitch as the front dropped, then pulled back slowly. The gear settled. The brakes caught. The aircraft stopped 30 meters from the edge of a dry creek bed no one had marked on the route charts. Inside the cabin, no one moved. The recon team looked at each other, breathing hard. One man unstrapped and sat back down without speaking. Another opened his mouth, closed it, and pulled the headset off his ears like the noise had just stopped. Dana unbuckled without sound. She pulled the overhead switch for auxiliary systems and lowered the temperature setting to neutral. Then she reached under her seat and removed the folded map. Her SatPass marked with slope shadows and crosswind notations. She looked at it once, folded it again, and slid it back into her vest. She powered down the engines one sequence at a time. Outside, the wind died to a whisper. Dust drifted against the edge of the clearing, soft and slow. No one spoke her name. The team leader came forward, still shaken. "Where are we?" he asked, more to the air than to her. Dana didn't answer right away. She tapped the barometer at her hip and glanced once at the sun's angle through the cockpit glass. Then she said calmly, "Safe. For now." The clearing wasn't marked on the digital maps. The terrain had shifted, or maybe it had never been scanned properly. But Dana had remembered it from a detail no one else had noticed: a shadow curve between slopes, a stand of crooked trees, a dip in pressure that she had logged a week earlier during a cargo run nearby. She hadn't filed it. She had just stored it. She reached up, shut off the last system light, and sat in silence while the team behind her slowly realized they were alive. The aircraft frame creaked softly as it cooled. The wind outside did not return. They had landed. Dana had brought them down intact, and no one, not a single one of them, understood how. The wind stayed low, brushing dust along the landing zone like breath across a quiet surface. The recon team gathered just beyond the aircraft, clustered in loose formation. Their gear was only half secured. One man adjusted his rifle sling while another paced, glancing up toward the nearest ridge. The team lead crouched beside the slope edge and tapped at his radio again. It gave nothing but faint static. The valley geometry was bending their signal. The clouds were too thick for bounce back. "We need elevation," he muttered. "If we get line of sight over that bluff, we might punch a signal out." Dana didn't look up from her chart. Her voice stayed even. "That bluff will reflect your heat signature in 3 directions. If someone is watching, you'll show up in under 30 seconds. The intel officer seated nearby looked up sharply. "They'll see us anyway." "Not if we stay small," Dana said. She didn't raise her tone. "Not if we hold the perimeter." The team lead stood. "We're not just going to sit here." Dana walked to the cargo hatch and pulled out 2 strips of orange fabric. She tied one to a broken crate lid and walked 10 paces from the nose of the aircraft. Then another, opposite direction. She placed the second at the 15-meter mark and looked around. "No one crosses this," she said. The team leader raised an eyebrow. "Says who?" Dana pointed once toward the cooling engine. "Says the one who put us here alive." That quieted them, if only briefly. She returned to the gear bay and began marking the corners of a rough perimeter using improvised tools and old flare casing. A ration sleeve pinned with a tent peg, a strip of black tape stretched between 2 stones. Her movements were precise. She did not explain them. Then the sound came. It was faint at first, footsteps brushing dry earth. Not hurried, but not random. The intel officer froze, his eyes narrowing toward the tree line. 3 figures stepped into view. Their rifles were visible, slung across their chests, but no patches marked their uniforms. Their clothing was mixed military cuts, worn thin with dust and age, boots mismatched. They walked in a staggered line. Not formation, but not casual either. The recon team shifted. Hands went to triggers. The team lead signaled for spacing. One man reached for his headset again, hoping for a pulse of signal. The intel officer started to lift his radio. Dana raised her hand without turning, her palm faced back. A silent command. The man hesitated, then stopped. She stepped forward. Not far. Just enough to leave the group behind her. Her body faced the three figures. Her hands were down, open. Her stance was still. The local stopped 10 meters out. One shifted his rifle slightly, not aiming, just adjusting. The middle one had a scarf over his face. Dust clung to their sleeves. Their eyes tracked every movement from the camp. Dana lifted her right hand slowly. She touched her chest, then pointed to the sun's position behind her shoulder. Her left hand gestured toward the aircraft, then to the circle she had drawn in the dirt minutes earlier. No words, just markers. The middle figure nodded once, then turned and walked back the way they had come. The others followed. The silence that followed wasn't relaxed. It was suspended, like a held breath. Dana turned back. Her pace did not change. She walked past the intel officer, who had frozen halfway into a crouch, past the team lead, whose mouth was half open but silent. She reached the edge of the circle, crouched, and wiped her palms once against her pants. Then she sat. Her chart lay across one knee. No one spoke. No one moved beyond the markers. Time passed. The light shifted. The wind turned once and died again. Dana adjusted her position slightly, tilted her head to check the cloud density, then looked back down at her chart. She made no announcement. She offered no orders. The perimeter held. Later, one of the younger recon members stepped to the edge of the line, eyes flicking toward the trees. He turned to speak. The team lead shook his head. Once. They stayed behind the markers. No one said it out loud, but whatever they thought of Dana before, they were no longer speaking over her. She had walked forward when no one else did. She had held the line with her body, not her voice. And she was still sitting there now, chart in hand, steady as the ridge behind her. The stillness had weight to it now, not just quiet, but something thicker, heavier, like time had slowed into waiting. The recon team sat in the shade cast by the wolfhound's wing, gear scattered but untouched. No one moved far from the perimeter Dana had drawn. The air stayed dry. The color of the sky now pale steel with just a hint of heat shimmer rising off the ridge. Dana sat at the edge of the 15-meter line, her knees drawn up, chart balanced across one thigh. She had watched the light change for over an hour without speaking. Behind her, the team lead paced. His boots kicked dust in short bursts with every turn. He muttered without direction, just fragments of frustration. We're sitting ducks. If no one comes in the next hour, we're exposed. No one responded. Dana checked the angle of the sun again. Her fingers hovered over her compass, then rested. Her eyes stayed on the ridgeline. Then the faint hum came. High at first, nearly indistinguishable from the static of wind. But she heard it. A small scout drone skimmed over the far slope, low and fast, barely casting a shadow. The recon team barely noticed it. Dana did. She stood. Not quickly. Just enough to reach behind her pack and pull out a folded reflective panel. She snapped it once to clear the fabric, held it up at an angle she had already calculated, and let the sun catch it in a flash across the clearing. A pause, a click of wind. Then the drone banked, visibly tracking her position. Static buzzed in the recon lead's headset. The comm unit sparked to life for just 12 seconds, long enough for a ping and a 5-digit return coordinate. The intel officer's voice cracked. They found us. Dana didn't look away from the sky. No, she said. They followed the window. The sound came next, deep and unmistakable. Rotor thunder rolled through the canyon as the CV-22B Osprey appeared over the ridge. Its twin rotors shimmered with speed, the profile unmistakable even from distance. Behind it, flanking wide, Two F-35A fighters banked in tight formation, scanning high and fast. The recon team stood slowly, one by one, shading their eyes as they watched. No one spoke. The Osprey circled once, checking terrain. Then its nose dipped, landing gear unfolding with surgical precision. It moved forward and dropped, settling with exact alignment down into the zone Dana had marked. Inside the perimeter she had laid out with nothing more than fabric strips, stone weights, and trust in what the ground had told her. Dust curled up in soft bursts as the Osprey touched down. Its side hatch opened. A pilot stepped out, helmet tucked under one arm, eyes scanning the area. He saw the markers first, then the flattened terrain, then the wolfhound, and then Dana. She stepped forward, holding her sketched diagram. The paper had been creased and refolded several times, but the ink still held. Wind arcs, drop slope, entry angle, safe radius. The pilot stopped in front of her, looked down at the grid, then at the land under his feet. He tilted his head slightly. "You cleared this." Dana nodded. He glanced back once at the Osprey. Then he looked at her again, not with disbelief, not even with surprise, just recognition. Behind them, the team lead whispered. Not to anyone in particular. She called the whole thing. No one answered. No one had anything to add. Dana reached into her vest and handed the pilot a smaller slip of paper. A note. Handwritten. "Timing's tight," she said. "Use the shelf wind to your left on takeoff. You'll clear clean if you go shallow and stay under the upper cross current." The pilot looked at the note, then at the ridge. He didn't question it. He folded the paper once and slid it into a side pocket. She turned without ceremony and walked back to the wolfhound. She picked up her chart and smoothed the edge that had curled in the wind. The others didn't follow her. They just stood there, watching the dust settle around the Osprey's gear, eyes shifting between the landing site and the fabric strips that still fluttered on the edge of the circle. The clearing held its shape. The air stayed calm. The fighters peeled off, climbing back to altitude. The Osprey crew moved with quiet speed, confirming extraction sequence. No one issued new orders. They followed the old ones, the ones Dana had written before they even landed. There were no congratulations, no handshakes. The pilot didn't salute. He didn't need to. He had landed on a place no one saw but her, on time, on target, on instinct trusted. Dana sat down again at the edge of the shade. She adjusted the position of the compass beside her knee. The angle still matched. They were going to make it out, because she had already been here in her mind before anyone else looked down. The briefing room was cooler than the outside air, but no one looked comfortable. The recon team sat in a loose semicircle. Boots still dusted from the landing zone, sleeves rolled high, eyes tired but focused. A monitor flickered in the corner, replaying satellite coverage of the Osprey descent. The image paused just as the aircraft touched down exactly inside the crude but perfect ring of marker flags. The commanding officer stood with a tablet in hand, flipping through the incident log. His voice was flat, procedural. "We have 14 minutes of recorded blackout before recon regained visibility." "Who held the perimeter?" There was a pause. A glance passed between two of the men. The intel officer cleared his throat and spoke. "Dana." The name landed in the room like a dropped tool sharp, loud, undeniable. No one repeated it. No one challenged it. The officer stopped flipping. His eyes flicked once to the bottom of the manifest list, where Dana's entry still read, "Support, Slot Delta." He tapped once with a stylus, then crossed out the label. His handwriting replaced it in the margin primary. No one clapped. No one stood. Outside, Dana was already at the wolfhound. Her hand moved across the forward glass in quiet, circular sweeps, clearing away the last of the dust left by the storm. The sun had tilted lower now, brushing long shadows across the flight line. She worked with slow patience. Her glove still looped at her belt, unused. The barometer at her hip clicked faintly as the pressure dropped again. The Osprey pilot walked by on his way back to the hangar. He didn't say anything. He just slowed, met her eyes once, and nodded. She nodded back. Behind them, the base returned to its rhythm-distant engine checks, muffled radio calls, and the soft buzz of wind against canvas siding. The world moved on. A junior mechanic passed by, a coil of cable slung over his shoulder. He stopped halfway and looked at the ridgeline in the distance. Then he turned toward Dana, hesitant. "How'd you know that shelf would hold?" he asked. Dana paused only a second, then said, "Maps lie. The ground doesn't." She didn't wait for a response. She closed the cargo hatch and stepped back from the aircraft, folding her chart once and sliding it under her arm. The logbook hung at her side, its edge worn soft from years of handling. She walked up the ramp without announcement, boots steady against the metal grate. At the top, she looked once toward the sky, then ducked inside. The Wolfhound didn't shine. Its paint had faded, its frame creaked at idle, and the tail bore scuffs from missions no one catalogued. But it had never failed her. It was ready before anyone asked. The wind shifted again, just slightly. The old barometer clicked again, soft and even. Dana placed her chart in the side pouch of the cockpit and ran her hand once across the edge of the panel. No awards would follow. No emails would circulate. No citation would be printed. But her name had been said once. That was enough. She reached for the seatbelt, clipped it loose from the rail, and settled in without sound. Somewhere above, the sky was already clearing, and Dana was ready for whatever came next. Dana was never the loudest voice or the highest rank. She didn't ask for permission to trust her instincts, and she never needed applause to know what she was capable of. In a world that overlooked her, she stayed steady. While others panicked, she read the ground. While others waited for orders, she moved with quiet clarity. Her strength was not in being seen, but in never looking away from what mattered. When it counted, she didn't rise to the moment she had already been there, prepared in silence. If you've ever felt underestimated or unseen, let Dana's story remind you that recognition is not what makes you real. It's what you carry when no one's watching that defines you. Take a moment to reflect. If this story spoke to something you've lived or felt, share your thoughts in the comments, and follow for more stories that honor quiet strength.